Well, I think it's because we care what happens to culture, right? We want, well, first and foremost, we want to live in a place where hopefully we can freely worship, where we have the ability to do that, and that there's not, that it's a safe environment in which to do it. But we also want to live in an environment where we can freely preach the gospel, or share the gospel with others. So I think because we have a concern about culture, and here's why I think that's important with law enforcement. It turns out, and I've been saying this for a number of years, that law enforcement is the one necessary profession upon which every other profession is contingent. So if you are working in some other profession, you can thank a police officer for the ability to do it freely, because you could be a doctor, but if you're concerned that your next patient's going to rob you instead of pay you, you're going to need someone there to enforce the laws that really allow you the freedom to practice medicine. And so it turns out that this is true for, we talk sometimes after COVID about essential services. And it seems like everything's an essential service. The person who's delivering groceries to your front door, that's now an essential service. Okay, fine. There may be a category, we would say, of essential services, but of all of those, the one foundational service is going to be, is that guy going to get robbed on the way to delivering your product? You have to have cops in place first. And that's why, and this is not, when I say it, I don't say it to kind of convey that cops are special. No, they're just foundational. And let's face it, most of us pay no attention to our foundations until they start to crack. These are the things you walk on, spit on, pee on, drop trash on. And this is why cops, when they go through the academy, they are abused by their drill instructors the same way they are in the military, because we want to make sure that we take all of the offense out of you. So you're not going to be offended on the outside. Whatever we did, we're taking that part of your nature out of you, because we know that that's what people do to foundations. They take them for granted. They don't particularly care for them. And what this also means is if you are an employee at a law enforcement agency, you need to understand that the bar is a lot higher for you. We can't tolerate any misbehavior. And that's why when we see misbehavior on the part of police officers, it's so utterly repugnant, because we know that this is the one area. If you don't have confidence in the law enforcement agency or the investigative agency, you're toast. You know, that's the stuff that if you don't have confidence in that group, well, that you don't have confidence, then you're done. So, and this is why I think you see this happening culturally right now, right? You get people who are starting to lose confidence in the agencies that are supposed to be the ones that determine what's true about something and then make sure that the bad guy goes to jail. Well, if you think the guy who's doing that is the bad guy, well, that's really, really hard. That's why we're seeing this panic over law enforcement, because we see there are people who do stupid things. Now, here's what I'll say about that. And we see it all the time. We're having this conversation because, and we see these riots because, yeah, there's some discord about what's happening in the country, but there's also discord about police officers generally. And if George Floyd incident hadn't happened, we'd be having a very different conversation.
Amen.
And so what you see though is people will say to me, well, how in the world did they ever allow someone like this police officer to get hired? Okay, well, there's a dirty little secret. Here's the dirty little secret. This is a terrible job that nobody should have to do. And there's an entire subculture of criminal behavior in our country that most people, they think it exists. They know, they see it in some TV shows, but until you're in it every day, it's like, it's hard to explain what cops are going to see on a day-to-day basis that's living right next door to you in the house that's next door. You never have to go in that house to see how ugly it is, but the cop does. So he knows that while there's like the surface kind of Instagram view of reality that everyone's living in, there's this behind the scenes ugliness that nobody's aware of. And we have really high hiring standards. So we're going to go through all of your background. It's going to be a physical, a psychological, your entire, everyone you've dated in the last 5 years, whoever you've lived next door to in the last 5 years, everyone you know, all those people are going to get talked to. That's not true for probably many other positions that you hire into. But what happens is, if you look at this ugly underworld for 10 years, you become the guy who does something you shouldn't do. And then you end up prosecuting that guy because he's become the person you allowed him to become. He wasn't that guy originally, but if you look at this too long, I can tell you that George Floyd thing, I watched it and I knew right away. It didn't matter. There was no racism involved in that. That was otherism. That was that this cop had been working those streets so long, probably without a rotation out, that he started to see everyone he's taken to jail as an other. There's us and them. And that's very natural if you do this job very long. And at some point, you've heard those words that guy said, that George Floyd said, you've heard them from 1,000 suspects. And every time you've heard it, it's been nonsense. And now you end up in a place where you don't trust anything that anyone's saying. And it's not because you are a terrible person we shouldn't have hired. It's you're just a normal person who, exposed to that for too long, doesn't trust anybody. And that's why we end up in terrible marriages or married many times. That's why we have a pretty, the rates of depression. And that's why a lot of guys retire from this job and they want to be isolated. They want to get away from everyone. They don't want to be talking to nobody. They want to retire in Wyoming on 100 acres where their house is in the middle on a hill with a turret. And they want to know who's coming up their driveway. That's kind of what happens to these guys because the job is terrible and nobody should have to do it. So that's, I think, where my heart is. And if we just care about our culture and the foundation of the culture, then we need to care about cops.